3 little girls, 3 matching initials, 3 bodies dumped in 3 different towns. And every single town started with the same letter as the girl found in it. Carmen Colón, found in Churchville. Wanda Walkowicz, found in Webster. Maenza, found in Macedon. Police called it a coincidence. The public didn't believe them. For 2 years, a killer, or killers, moved through the suburbs of Rochester, New York, picking girls whose names spelled out their own deaths. Parents pulled their children out of school if their initials matched. Families changed their kids' nicknames out of superstition, and more than 50 years later, no one has ever been arrested. This is the story of the alphabet murders, and the killer who is statistically most likely still out there. Rochester, New York, in the early 1970s, was not a city that expected this. It was a working-class place, Kodak country, full of tight immigrant and blue-collar neighborhoods where kids still walked to the corner store alone. That ordinary freedom is what made the first disappearance so quietly devastating, because nothing about it looked like the beginning of anything. On the evening of November 16, 1971, 10-year-old Carmen Colón was sent on an errand. Her grandmother needed a prescription picked up from the pharmacy, just a block and a half from their home. Carmen walked over. When she arrived, around 4:30 in the afternoon, the pharmacist told her the medication wasn't ready yet. So she did what any child told to wait would do. She stepped outside, and she waited. Witnesses later said they saw her get into a car parked at the curb. Nobody thought much of it in the moment. A girl getting into a car on a quiet street, maybe a neighbor, maybe a relative. About an hour after that, a driver on the shoulder of Interstate 49 saw something that should have stopped the whole city cold. A young girl, naked from the waist down, running and flailing her arms at passing traffic, chased by a car that appeared to be backing up toward her. The driver did not stop. Nobody stopped. Carmen was never seen alive again. 2 days later, 2 teenage boys riding their bikes near Churchville, about 15 miles outside the city, found her body in a ditch beside the road. For a moment, they thought it was a broken doll. She had been strangled from the front, her body marked with fingernail scratches, evidence of a struggle so violent it left the killer's own skin under her nails or hers under his. A fight this 10-year-old girl put up in the last minutes of her life. Investigators quickly focused on someone close to home, Carmen's uncle, Miguel Colón. 2 days after her murder, he left the country for Puerto Rico. A Monroe County detective flew out to try to find him. Colón eventually returned to New York and was brought in for questioning, but he was never charged. The case against him went nowhere, and for 20 years he lived freely. In 1991, during a domestic dispute at his home on Radio Street in Rochester, Miguel Colón shot his wife and brother-in-law, wounding them both, then took his own life. He died having never answered for what happened to his niece. For a while, that was the whole horror story. One girl, one likely suspect who escaped justice by dying before he could be tried. Rochester grieved and moved on the way cities do. Then, 17 months later, it happened again. On April 2, 1973, 11-year-old Wanda Walkowicz left her home on Avenue D to run a simple errand, groceries for her mother. She made it to the store. She paid. Witnesses saw her walking home afterward. She never arrived. Less than 24 hours later, on the morning of April 3rd, a New York State trooper on routine patrol found her body at a rest area off Route 104 in Webster, a town just northeast of Rochester. She had been raped and strangled, but this time from behind. A different method than Carmen, a detail that would matter enormously to investigators, and still does. At first, police publicly downplayed any connection between the 2 killings. The manner of strangulation was different. The circumstances were different. But behind the scenes, they were far less confident it was unrelated than they let on. A sheriff's sergeant who had worked the Colón case was quietly reassigned to the new task force investigating Wanda's murder. 2 girls. Similar ages. Similar disappearances in broad daylight, running simple errands, vanishing between one familiar place and another. And then someone in Rochester noticed something that turned quiet unease into citywide panic. Carmen Colón, found in Churchville. Wanda Walkowicz, found in Webster. Both girls' first and last names shared the same starting letter, and both had been left in towns beginning with that identical letter. C and CW and W. It could have been coincidence. 2 data points can look like a pattern if you want them to. But nobody in Rochester was in the mood to bet their children's lives on statistics. 7 months later, on November 26, 1973, 11-year-old Michelle Maenza had already had a hard day, bullied at school, the kind of ordinary cruelty that felt like the whole world that afternoon. Days earlier, her mother had misplaced her purse at a local shopping plaza near the school. That afternoon, around 3:20, a classmate would be among the last to see her. Michelle disappeared that day. Her body was found in Macedon, another town to the city's outskirts, raped and strangled from behind, in a manner investigators would later say closely matched Wanda's murder, far more than it matched Carmen's. Michelle Maenza, found in Macedon, M&M. 3 girls. 3 matching names, 3 towns that spelled out the same letter as the child found dead inside them. The city did not treat this as coincidence anymore. Parents kept children indoors. Families with kids whose initials matched, a Debbie Diaz, a Sandra Simmons, lived through a specific targeted kind of fear that most families never have to imagine. The terror that your child's own name might be what gets her killed. The press gave it a name that has outlived every official denial for 50 years, the alphabet murders. Some call it the double initial murders. Both names still circulate today because the case that inspired them was never closed. Here's the part that still divides investigators, authors, and retired detectives who've spent decades on this case. They don't all agree it was one killer. Carmen was strangled facing her attacker. Wanda and Michelle were both strangled from behind. A completely different physical, and profilers would argue, psychological act. One true crime author who co-wrote a book on the case, working directly from police sources, has said publicly that he believes Wanda and Michelle were very likely killed by the same man, but that Carmen's murder may have been committed by someone else entirely. Her uncle, running to Puerto Rico 2 days after her death, remains the strongest single suspect in her case specifically. Whoever killed Wanda and Michelle may be a completely separate, still unidentified predator who happened to strike in the same city in the same window of time, and who may have simply been an opportunist cruising for girls walking alone, with the matching initials being nothing more than a horrifying coincidence that the public turned into a myth. Investigators have never ruled out that theory, but they've never proven it either. There's been one real suspect named publicly in the decades since, and his story is almost as disturbing as the murders themselves. In 1986, a Rochester man raped an 11-year-old girl. He was convicted and sentenced the following year to up to 25 years in prison. When his sentence ended, the state didn't release him. He was held under civil confinement, the legal process used to keep violent sexual offenders locked up past their release date if a court believes they remain a danger to the public. He stayed confined for decades. During that time, he became a prison pen pal with one of the authors researching the alphabet murders, corresponding extensively about the case. He lived in the same neighborhood as Wanda and Michelle. He was free, not incarcerated, at the time both girls were killed. In November of 2023, at 76 years old, he was quietly released back into Rochester. He has never been charged in connection with the Alphabet murders. He remains, to the researchers who've spent the most time on this case, one of the only named people who fits. The physical evidence tells its own frustrating story. DNA recovered from 2 of the 3 victims was destroyed years ago, long before modern genetic testing existed to make use of it, a decision made in an era when nobody understood what that evidence would one day be capable of proving. But DNA from Wanda Walkowicz's case still exists. It's been preserved, and as forensic genealogy techniques keep improving, the same techniques that have cracked cold cases decades older than this one, investigators and the victims' families keep holding on to the possibility that Wanda's case, at least, is genuinely solvable. Wanda's own sisters are still alive today, still publicly pushing for DNA testing, still waiting for the phone call that says it's over. 53 years, 3 little girls who never made it home from errands, their families sent them on without a second thought. A prescription, a bag of groceries. 3 towns that will always be remembered for the wrong reason, and a killer, or killers, who was never a stranger lurking in the shadows in the way we like to imagine. He was someone who blended into a Rochester neighborhood well enough to walk up to a child in broad daylight and have her get in a car or follow him without a scream, without a witness who understood what they were watching until it was already too late. New York State Police still list these cases as open. Somewhere, the man who did this, or the men who did this, are either dead, like Miguel Colón, who took his secrets with him, or they are old now, walking around a city that has spent half a century whispering their name without ever knowing what it is.